Oh, shoot. Well, hello, everyone.
All right.
Not yet. Not yet.
I forgot. Nick's doing the intro. Go ahead, Nick.
No, actually,
I'm not. Actually, Commissioner Carter is doing it, so I'll let you know when we're on. Don't worry.
all right. So good evening and welcome to the Monday, September 21st meeting of the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. This is actually a special meeting. This is a joint session of the Planning Commission with the Multimodal Transportation Commission. So we want to thank and welcome the Multimodal Transportation Commissioners. And in a moment, I'm going to turn this over to our Vice Chair. Oh, forgive me, my name is David Carter. I'm the Chair of the Planning Commission. Momentarily, we'll be turning this over to our Vice Chair to run the rest of the meeting, Luke Sinclair. But first, I will ask Kyle Kobe to give us an introduction to the rules of engagement for the evening.
Thank you very much. My name is Kyle Kobe, and I'll be facilitating the Zoom video portion of the meeting. With me here is Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director, and David Cronin, City Engineer. We will work alongside the Chair or Vice Chair, who is on remote video, to facilitate the meeting proceedings. Currently, I have everyone muted so we can talk through the general ground rules for tonight's meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast live on the city's YouTube channel and public access cable channel 25. During the meeting, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand corner of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. When you are muted, a red line will appear over the icon. This will make it easier for everyone to hear the meeting. Just remember to unmute if and when you want to speak. In the menu, you can also turn your camera on or off by clicking the video icon located next to the microphone icon. For the purposes of this public meeting, please keep your video on for the duration. If you are participating by phone, you can enter *6 to mute and unmute your phone. Somewhere on your Zoom screen, you will also see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker. Gallery view tiles all of the meeting participants. A few reminders to ensure that the provisions of the Kansas Open Meetings Act are met. Commissioners, you must state your name and title each time you speak. Members of city staff must also state their name and title each time they speak. I'd also ask that applicants and members of the public identify themselves each time before they speak to ensure that everyone is able to follow along. Individuals who signed up in advance to provide public comment remotely will be called upon by name. When called on, please unmute your listening device and state your name before speaking. Chair will then call for in-person public comment for those who are physically present. All motions will need to be stated clearly. After a motion is made and seconded, staff will call on each commissioner individually to provide their vote. I don't know that we'll be having any motions tonight, though. Probably not. I want to again remind everyone to please mute yourself when you are not speaking. And now I'll turn the meeting back over to Commissioner Sinclair.
Thank you, Kyle. Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. I just want to thank you, everyone, for being here. As Chair Carter indicated, it's my understanding, Kyle, that we need to have roll taken for the Planning Commission. Is that right?
Kyle Kobe with Planning, yes, I believe we'll be doing roll for Planning Commission, and then we'll be doing roll for the Multimodal Transportation Commission right after that.
Okay, is that something you want me to take, or Jeff, will you be doing that?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. Be happy to call the roll, and we can establish quorum for the meeting. So I will go ahead and proceed with that line. Commissioner Ashworth?
I am here.
Commissioner Butler?
Here.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Here.
Commissioner Carter?
Here.
Commissioner Payton?
Here.
Commissioner Sands?
Here.
Commissioner Sinclair?
Here.
Commissioner Struckoff?
Here.
Commissioner Willie?
Here.
Planning Commission has a quorum. And I will turn it over to David Cronin for Multimodal Transportation Commission.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Dave Cronin, City Engineer, Municipal Services and Operations. Go ahead and call the roll for the Multimodal Transportation Commission. Commissioner Kuzmiak.
Here.
Commissioner Bryan.
Here.
Commissioner Bowen.
Here.
Commissioner Evans,
Here.
Commissioner Payton,
Here again.
Commissioner Schartz. She's absent. Commissioner Freeman,
Here.
Commissioner Holteen. She's absent. And Commissioner Allen. And I believe Commissioner Allen may be joining us a little bit later. So with that, I guess we have a quorum as well, and we'll go ahead and get started.
Thank you both. Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. I do want to, at this point, open it up for public comment. And I believe we had one speaker sign up in advance who, during the course of calling roll, I think has maybe logged on. Is that accurate? Is Michael Allman on the line?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can, Mr. Allman.
Okay.
So we're going to take public comment at the front end, and I think maybe that could help if you have prepared statements with things for us to consider as we launch into the study session in a few minutes here. And what we're going to do, sir, is follow the rules that we do normally during our regular meetings, which is to limit comments to 3 minutes. And so you are welcome to go ahead and talk to us.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity. I had thought that I might be reflecting on some of your discussion after you had your discussion, but that's fine. I think this is a great event that you're doing, and I hope it's the first of several meetings of this type. I know that there's been a couple instances that I've been at meetings at the Planning Commission when the concern of transportation arose, and there wasn't any really formal way to address it within the context of the Planning Commission. I'm thinking, for instance, of a recent replat and rezoning at on Harper Avenue, where there's a dog leg on Harper, and there are going to be 3 driveways entering Harper Avenue on that dog leg. And the neighborhood didn't have any particular concern with the land use issue with activities on the site or activities as they affect neighbors, nothing about the land use corner. It was, we were concerned with traffic safety. The Planning Commission didn't have any vehicle to which to address that. So in general, I find it very important that there be coordination. A couple of years ago, the old city manager, Tom Marcus, made some moves with city staff to eliminate what's called silos. I'm sure you're familiar with the term. I think it's even more important that those kind of blocks, restrictions between governing bodies and advisory boards, that horizontal communication, that's very important, even more so than with staff communicating out of their silos. So I'm glad to see you do this. I would encourage you to engage the Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Board, not just staff, but the policy board at the same level that your 2 groups are. They have a major effect on our transportation planning and, of course, land use planning. It's all tied together, as I'm sure you know. So I just like to leave you with that comment, and I look forward to the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Allman. I would encourage you to stay on the line if you're able to, because it may be that people would have questions for you at some point during our discussion or later on. Kyle, is anybody in the chambers there? Has anyone ventured down there to offer comment that you can tell?
Kyle Kobe with planning. There's nobody that I can see.
Thank you. Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. So as the chair said, we have with us tonight the Multi-modal Transportation Commission. We're privileged to have them here. And as I understand it, they were created by ordinance to assist the City Commission in multimodal planning. And I wouldn't do it justice if I went in any more than that. So I think what we have thought about doing is perhaps providing each commission a little bit of an introduction of each other, so to speak. And so what we're going to do is have a short 5 or so minute introduction by someone on the Multi-modal Transportation Commission. And then Commissioner Jim Carpenter, our immediate past chair, is going to do something similar from the Planning Commission standpoint. And so for that, Chair Kuzmiak, I might turn it over to you, and you can either take it over for the introduction or designate whoever you'd like to have do that.
Sounds good. Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC Chair. So on our side, our immediate past chair, Steve Evans, was going to graciously give us an introduction on kind of the background of MMTC, how we got to where we are, what we do, what issues we try to tackle, and I guess where we're trying to go. So with that, Commissioner Evans, would you like to take it away?
Sure. Am I audible?
Yep.
Okay, great. Steve Evans, Transportation Commissioner. Before we get started, I'd like to ask Charlie and Aaron to follow me up after my few comments and embellish just a few things about our history and evolution. And to begin with, I think it would be good for each of our commissioners to provide just a brief introduction of themselves and their interest and motivation in getting on this board whenever they started. We did start in 2016, so we're in our 4th year. So if we could do that, I'm just going around my screen here. Aaron, would you like to start that off?
I'm sorry, Steve, did you say me?
Yeah, I did. It's all yours.
Yeah, my internet keeps cutting out, so if I miss something, it's probably because I didn't hear it. Just introducing myself, I was involved in the Multi-modal Transportation Commission before it began. Upon moving back to Lawrence in 2011-12, I became very interested. Before I left, I was very interested in transportation in Lawrence, but I had studied urban planning unrelated to transportation. And upon moving back, my neighborhood asked me to get involved in some things related to transportation, and I became interested in at the time, the pedestrian coalition. And on the pedestrian coalition, I facilitated for a couple of years. We asked at some point for a task force to study issues and look at issues in Lawrence around pedestrian and bicycling. And from that ask with the pedestrian coalition and the bicycle advisory committee, we had a task force that sort of one of the recommendations from that came the Multi-modal Transportation Commission. Sorry, I think I'm telling everything Steve was going to tell about that, but so that started in 2017, and I've been on it since its inception.
Great, thank you, Aaron. Carol, it looks like you're the next one on the screen here, so it's your turn.
Hello, everyone. I was thinking back, Steve alerted us that we would be speaking. I've been working on pedestrian issues for 40 years, and it's been a long time. We moved to Lawrence in '79, and we live in a pedestrian neighborhood. We rarely used our cars. In fact, we could forget where we left them. We walked to work. We really had quite a nice time. We had bike baskets, so we hauled our groceries in bike baskets. But it got harder and harder to cross the street. And so I started getting involved. My daughter graduated from South Junior High, and she was going up to the high school. I called the school, I called the city. I said, how's my daughter going to get across the street? There weren't even pedestrian signs at the time. no signals, nothing. And they told me to buy her a clunker. And I thought, oh, this is just not right. And then I was on a roll. I've been on the Transportation Task Force for Horizon 2020. I've been on 2 transportation planning documents. I was in, what do we call our organization? PEDCO, Pedestrian Coalition. I've also been involved in regular traffic studies. Our Louisiana Street traffic study was the very first calming traffic study. Nobody even remembers it. It was in 2000. So I've been on it a long time.
Thank you, Carol. Let's see, Lauren, looks like you're next up.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren Freeman. I'm fairly new to the commission. I think this is my 3rd meeting. I am an MPA student at KU, and I'm interested in these issues mostly just to make the community more livable for everyone. And I think transportation is a huge component of that, making it more walkable, bikeable. As a student, I think it's important to make those transportation connections for students, but I'm also just interested in making Lawrence a better place for everyone. So very excited for these conversations and looking forward to talking more.
Thanks, Lauren. Nick.
There we go. Sorry about that. Nick Kuzmiak, I'm the TC chair. As I mentioned, I'm the current chair of the Multi-modal Transportation Commission. I've been on it for a little over 2 years. And my interest in getting here, as you'll probably see in the presentation that follows these introductions, is that I was kind of raised in the environment of urban planning, transportation, engineering. I'm an engineer by trade, but I've always been fairly cognizant of kind of how land use and transportation affect each other, even if I couldn't articulate it or really know why. I've lived in a couple different cities around the country, from very urban in Philadelphia to quite suburban in Houston and even Austin. And it wasn't until I got to Houston that I realized that, I guess, A, traffic issues can be so, I guess, oppressive that it makes you want to do something. And B, it's really hard to get involved in the government of a very large city. So much to my surprise, when I moved to Lawrence, I found out kind of how accessible local government is. So I thought, perfect to channel that momentum into getting involved in something to see if I can try to actually make a difference. So that has led me here. I started on the Public Transportation Advisory Commission or committee, and they sent me here as a representative. We no longer have representatives that are individual checkboxes, if you will. So I'm not necessarily the PTAC representative anymore. And sorry, Steve, that was probably something you were going to say as well. But at one point, I was the PTAC representative. So anyway, that's it for me.
Thanks, Nick. Charlie.
Charlie Bryan, Multi-modal Transportation Commission. I don't know how long ago I got interested in this, but my undergraduate degree is in urban studies and planning. So I think I've had an interest in urban planning for quite a while. When I moved to Lawrence, it was to go to school at KU for public administration. So after that, I ended up getting married, staying here, and looked for different ways to get involved. My job ended up probably being the way that I got most involved in different community issues. Specifically, I was the community health planner at the health department. And through that work, I was involved in Lidwell, Lawrence at the time, now Lidwell, Douglas County, and then the Pedestrian Coalition, and other groups that I kind of got involved in as part of my work eventually led to my involvement in the Pedestrian Bike Issues Task Force, and ultimately to the Transportation Commission. I'm no longer the community health planner at the health department, so now at this point, my work is entirely different. But I'm no longer representing the health department. Kind of going to the next point, that we don't serve as a representative body anymore. But I've been involved in transportation planning for a while. I was the original chair of our commission, that first year that we formed. And I think that's all. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, great, Charlie. Steve Evans, Transportation Commissioner. I think I ended up here in maybe a much different way than a lot of the folks that you just heard from. I'm a retired architect, and I moved from the county into Lawrence in 2015. And at that time, many of you, some of you may remember the proposal to put the bus hub in Lot 90 over by the rec center at KU. And I got involved in the neighborhood association and just really wanted to be involved in the community. And that was kind of a pathway for me, and certainly eye-opening in terms of the process and what we all went through during that time. I think the other thing that I'd point out is I ride a bicycle probably 2,000 miles a year just for recreational purposes. So just kind of, you know, that interest in being involved in the community and being involved in physical activity and health and fitness kind of led me to thinking this would be a nice thing to get into. So that was my entry, and that was 4 years ago. So in the meantime, I'd have to say when I started, I was very green, and strategically how the transportation was set up, I think was pretty wise in terms of getting folks like Charlie and Aaron and Carol and others who had a long history, but also some new people that probably, you know, on a really good day would ask a lot of questions. So that was my entry, and I've certainly enjoyed it for the last 4 years. The next, I'm going to give a brief segment here, and as past chairs, Charlie and Aaron and I are going to chime in here on the history of the board and its evolution. We do want to get on to the subject matter here, but I think it'd be interesting to kind of see how this whole thing evolved. We were created in 2016, and as Nick and Charlie referred to, the bylaws at the time required that the board be composed of various entities, including local businesses, bicyclists, pedestrians, PTAC, the health department, and other interest groups. Also, the school district and KU were represented. I kind of look back at our first year and how we would kid ourselves in terms of, yeah, we were the Transportation Commission, but it seemed like we became the Traffic Calming Commission. That first year, we looked at many, many traffic calming projects, and we're really pretty overwhelmed by it. But I think the good news with that is we realized, along with, you know, the wise decisions of the staff, that that was just so overwhelming that I don't think we could really make an impact on the community. And we asked ourselves, are we really doing the right thing? Well, happily, this has now evolved into a strategic approach to this and other transportation issues as the neighborhood traffic management program that is currently in its infancy, and it's out there getting to the public. Certainly has a long way to go, and the pandemic's slowed us down quite a bit, but I think when staff brought that idea to us, we got really excited about, you know, raising our bar to the level of maybe making a little bigger impact on the community than traffic calming projects. If I could recall correctly, some major revisions to our bylaws were initiated and approved in the 2019 timeframe. As Nick referred to, the membership at that time, we decided would not be composed of a checklist of people representing the entities in the original bylaws. We thought that it would be good if anybody in the community that had an interest would have an opportunity to apply to get into the board. And we thought that would certainly give us more diversity in terms of the interest and the background of people that come into the group. That's been a couple of years in the making, and you know, with the recent additions of Tom Allen and Lauren, I think I'm personally just really excited about the makeup of the board now and what they bring to the table, and the diversity, using diversity in a very broad sense of what we can bring to the table and look at. I think our notable accomplishments include a couple of things. The first thing that I always think of is the project, the 19th Street project from Harper to O'Connell. I think we really grew up as a commission and as a board during this process. It lasted, I think, a year and a half before we finally put the gavel down on our recommendation to the city commission. But we learned a lot about interacting with the public, collaborating with the public, and debating amongst ourselves what we thought was the right way to go with this. And I'm not sure everyone agreed with this, but I think what we ended up with was a good compromise, giving the various interests and ideas and how our group represented different people and groups in the community. We've certainly gotten our arms around various bike and ped projects while utilizing the good work the staff has done with regard to safe routes, rideability maps, the Lawrence Loop, and other tools in the city's toolbox. And lastly, I'll point out that we did update the Complete Streets policy in 2018. And I think it still needs some growth in terms of how it's used, but our staff and our engineers are utilizing the checklist and the policy throughout a project, from the conceptual stage to the development of plans. I'm going to pass this to Charlie and Aaron in just a second, but just a few final thoughts. And any input you guys would want to provide here would be interesting, but we often ask ourselves, what can we really expect from a board that meets once a month for 2 or 3 hours? Sometimes I think we bite off more than we can chew. We talk a lot about a strategic focus and a specific project focus, and we're still evolving in the sense of what should our focus be with regard to those two aspects of what we do. And kind of a segue to Charlie, who really promoted getting together with the Planning Commission and in fact other advisory boards too. How can we be better if we interact more with other city and county boards? So thanks for listening the last few minutes. And Charlie, if you want to take a few minutes and let Aaron go after you, that would be great.
Thanks, thanks, Steve. Charlie Bryan, Multi-modal Transportation Commission. I think the piece I would add is really a little history before we formed. And I was involved on the pedestrian bike issues task force that created the recommendation that there ought to be a transportation commission. And just getting to Steve's last point about interacting with other city appointed boards. At the time, we did kind of a review of all the city commission appointed boards and found, I think, about 9 that in one way or another had work that was related to transportation. And there was a subcommittee of the pedestrian bike issues task force that met, basically convened a meeting with the chairs of all of those committees and the staff liaisons to those committees, and kind of put it out there, you know, our analysis of how they all touch on transportation matters. And then we also had meetings one-on-one with each of the, at the time, elected city commissioners, and asked them two basic questions. What makes for an effective advisory board? And what would they like to see out of any kind of future transportation decision-making? And that process led to recognizing that the current advisory board structure didn't really meet the needs of the city commission or the public or staff. And so that's where we came up with a recommendation to form, essentially a broader advisory board that would try to serve all three of those groups, the public, the city commission, and staff. And so at the time, Commissioner Mike Amix had been the first to kind of point to the idea of a transportation commission. And he, at the time, he said it should be more similar to the planning commission, where he even went as far to say that, perhaps the transportation commission ought to have enough authority that to vote against the transportation commission, would be treated in a similar way, the voting differently to the planning commission would be, which, as planning commissioners, is potentially a big deal. So, we didn't go that far, obviously, with the recommendation, but we did recognize that there was a deficit with the previous approach, and then recommended some new body be created. And we pointed specifically to the traffic safety committee, and then the pedestrian or the bicycle advisory committee as two that didn't seem to be serving the best interests of the public or the city commission and potentially staff. So that was kind of it's the explanation for why there was a formation of a new transportation commission. And then I think Steve covered everything else, how it evolved. Initially it was set up as a representative body, and then it evolved to just be a general body. And I think the other thing maybe that might be left out of what you said, Steve, is we specifically added the word multimodal to the name of the commission as part of those revisions last year. And that was to further emphasize that this is about kind of a holistic approach to transportation planning. And I would say the only thing that's kind of still out there that's not fully embraced is the role of public transit in multimodal. As you know, there is still a separate committee that does provide support to the public transit system, the PTAC, as Nick mentioned earlier. So I think that's all I have to add, Steve.
Good job. Aaron, would you like to add a few things?
I think for now, maybe just my curiosity, and anyone from multimodal can correct me or add to it if they think that this isn't quite accurate. But one thing that I think we've constantly wondered or thought about in our thinking about where Multimodal Transportation Commission is going to next is, at least for me, scope. One thing I think that really made me start questioning really what our scope is was the Plan 2040. And when I'm on either commission, I'm always questioning whether we're honoring that, or whether sometimes it feels a little arbitrary. Are we pushing things in the direction that plan that honors that plan? And so, I mean, I think I was kind of hoping to get a feel for that, but I feel like that's the thing that I'm always trying to get a feel for. So I thought that would be one thing that might be interesting to kind of think about tonight.
Thanks, Aaron. I'd open it up. I know we need to get on, but does anybody on our group have anything to add to that? Okay, Nick, we'll pass it back to you. Thanks, everybody.
Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC Chair. Commissioner Sinclair, I will leave it to you to introduce Planning Commission as you see fit. And yeah, once I guess we've all gotten to know each other a little bit better, because I can understand that this may take a while. This is the first time that our two commissions have ever really met. So yeah, there's going to be some introductions that have to get made. So take it away then.
Thank you, Chair. Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner, Vice Chair, excuse me. I'm gonna hand it over to Commissioner Carpenter, who has graciously agreed to give a little introduction of the Planning Commission.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. This is no small task. What the Planning Commission is charged to do is reaches into all aspects of land use in the city and the county, with the exception of the incorporated areas of Eudora, Baldwin, and Compton. And then we can even have joint meetings with those three bodies if anything in the county occurs within 3 miles of their growth zones. The Planning Commission is really a creature of statute, state statute. It's required to hear certain items because of the direct impact on individuals' property rights through land use decisions. The Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission, which is the entire title, which is a mouthful, was created by a joint resolution between the city of Lawrence and Douglas County. I believe it was in 1967. It's gone through a lot of changes and modifications since then. If you look at our bylaws, we're specifically charged with reviewing and making recommendations on rezoning proposals in both the city and the county, with recommendations to those governing boards, to review and give recommendations on conditional use permits in the county, special use permits in the city. Our bylaws are a little bit out of date after that because it talks about certificates of survey. Since we've currently updated rural subdivision guidelines and rural zoning, now it's rural subdivision guidelines. We are charged with reviewing and making recommendations about annexation proposals, new land to come into the city. The biggest task we recently had under the stewardship of Commissioner Willie was to go through and make recommendations and approve Plan 2040, our new comprehensive plan. In doing the comprehensive plan, we are co-equal with the city commission and the county commission to take approval of all three bodies to finally get to Plan 2040, which we have in place now. The same applies where we are co-equal with text amendments to that plan. So you can see sometimes somebody comes in to request a text amendment, and there have already been those to Plan 2040, and the Planning Commission will decide no, and that's the end of it. Nobody has taken it up to the city or the county to try an end run around that. We also look at text amendments, like I just said. We are supposed to review the capital improvement plan each year put out by the city of Lawrence, just to see if it is in compliance with land use guidelines, which has already been so thoroughly vetted by the excellent staff that there's really never much to do with that. Other things, we have final say on certain variances, and this is relevant for this group tonight. A lot of those are most common when we see have to do with right of way, whether to keep it at historic levels or because under the current code, it's much wider than current streets are. So we often have requested for a variance on that to keep it where it is. That's happened through most of 6th Street now, going out, and this happened, I think we have another one coming up this Wednesday on 9th Street. 19th Street, just down the street from my house. So, you know, we're the end of the road on that unless somebody wants to go to court. We are considered a quasi-judicial body, which means that we have to follow very specific rules with public notice on every item that comes before us. It has to have been in the paper. You'll see the yellow signs around town. We've had issues about notice before, and staff has gone out to redo notice on that and put up more signs and try to engage neighborhoods more. We are kind of the front line for a lot of ideas that come up from both the city and the county commissions. We're the first opportunity to have a public hearing and get public input on some sometimes very controversial projects, ones that, well, just since I've been on the commission since January 2016, we've had the ORIAD design guidelines come through. We've done rezoning to use for all of East Lawrence neighborhood. We are, like I said, we did Plan 2040. We've modified the design guidelines for many warehouses. There's multiple ways to go with that. We're looking at accessory dwelling units, double density, two houses on the same lot. We have, I mean, it just goes on and on, and we can just go all night. Sometimes it's quite surprising what comes before us. We've had to touch and gain some limited knowledge at times on federal law. Commissioner Butler and my favorite one, which is the Federal Telecommunications Act, which goes to cellular towers and their placement and our lack of authority to do much about it. And quarries. I mean, we've had some quarries come up, and just to give you an idea of the breadth of information that comes into us and what is helpful to have some knowledge about. This is just 2 sentences from an email that came to me after we had talked about the expansion of the quarry by Eudora, and then the city commission sent it back to the city of Eudora for some more input. But it said this is telling. It says, if nothing else, this is a big lesson in how much local governance affects community well-being and directly impacts the environment. It's got a bit of everything: zoning, bonds, reclamation bonds, mitigation credits, levies, stipulations, grandfather clauses, conflicts of interest, land reclamation, conditional use permits versus temporary business use permits, notification requirements, geology, hydrology, pH, and sick cattle. So we kind of make use of the breadth of knowledge of our commissioners, 5 of which are appointed by the city, 5 by the county. And we have some attorneys, we have people with planning backgrounds, we have people with environmental backgrounds, people that farm. We have a lot and that we look at. We have Commissioner Willie is in a volunteer fire department. We've called on that expertise when there have been concerns about the risk of fire from boat storage. I mean, it's just in the ability of a volunteer fire department to address potential problems. So we draw on that, and some of us have been involved with city or county issues for more years. I think Carol's got us all on that, but some of us have been doing it an awful long time. And I don't know what Commissioner Sinclair, Vice Chair Sinclair would like us to do. If we want to go around and do a little bit of introductions, it'd be good to have, you know, some, maybe the other past chairs that are on here, Commissioner Willie and Commissioner Struckoff, could chime in a little bit on things that I've more than likely missed. But I'll leave it up to Vice Chair Sinclair on where we go next.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. And I think I don't want to burn too much time off the clock because I think our goal was to have a sort of an end time of 8:30, but it may be beneficial to have everyone just do a really short introduction, minute or less, sort of as to how you got on, I guess what interests you in getting on the Planning Commission, how long you've been on the commission, something to that effect. And then we can hopefully launch into the topics that the Multimodal Transportation Commission wanted to discuss. So if we could, I'll just start real quickly and then I'll just go down the line if that's okay. My name is Luke Sinclair. I think I'm in the first year of my second term on the Planning Commission. I'm a county appointee and I got interested in planning during law school through a course I took at KU involving local government law and just tracking a project through the process, and then had exposure to planning issues in a house the first house my wife and I owned. There were significant development that was going to be happening across the street, and that kind of got us on the radar for what happened as a property owner. And so that kind of really interested me. And so when the opportunity came up, I jumped at it, and I've been really glad to be a part of the commission and to work with such high caliber people. And so I'll just go down the line too. Chair Carter, if you wouldn't mind going, and then we'll just move on down the line.
No, not at all. Thanks, Commissioner Sinclair. David Carter, Chair. I took my first, I'm a Lawrence native. I was born at a part of Lawrence Memorial Hospital that no longer even exists. I got my first interest in city planning as an exchange student in Europe as a teenager in the 80s, and was exposed to new visions of urban form and public transit, and speaking of multimodal transportation. I was fascinated that as a 16-year-old, I could get from a small town in central Germany to any place in Europe without a driver's license, and that was something that I carried with me. And I ended up getting a geography degree from KU, city planning, Master of City Planning from UC Berkeley, but I never actually practiced planning. Serving as a planning commissioner has been kind of a return to me to a lifelong interest, and that's pretty much it for me. Commissioner Sinclair, do you want to call on the next person?
Yeah, Luke Sinclair, Planning Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Payton, you're next on the list. Do you want to add anything from your perspective as a planning commissioner?
I guess I will. So I got interested in planning commission here. I actually have a master's degree in urban planning. It's environmental land use planning, but my studies when I was in urban planning actually were not urban planning at all. They were, I did some things on habitat restoration and viability of the grizzly bear in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So sometimes I feel like I'm sort of, my urban planning knowledge is really not urban planning, but I became interested in planning because of biking and walking in Lawrence and feeling like I had had too many close calls and that it was hard to do here. And so it was actually transportation issues that got me interested in planning specifically in Lawrence, and bikeability and walkability and traveling to other places. So I think that's it. That's all I want to add.
Thank you, Commissioner Payton. Next up, Commissioner Carpenter, would you like to add some more personal information about yourself?
Just say that we moved to Lawrence in 1992. Prior to that, I had a bachelor's in biology, master's in environmental studies, and then a law degree. During my grad school time, I did take a course on land use and zoning, which basically I forgot about until we moved into our current house in '94, and individuals from the Barker neighborhood came around doing a survey on sidewalks. Went to the first Barker neighborhood meeting, and through our lack of knowledge, my wife and I agreed to be the co-secretaries. So since then, I went on up vice president, president of the Barker Neighborhood Association, representative to the Lawrence Association of Neighborhoods for years, where I got to meet Commissioner Bowen back then. I learned a lot from. Ran for city commission in 2005, wasn't successful at that, but then was appointed for 6 years to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Did that, and then just kind of got a little burned out, dropped out. But to back up, around 2000, we really got involved learning about the Planning Commission when there was a big development that wanted to go down, replace a agricultural field with a trailer park, and kind of led the charge of our neighborhood for 5 years with multiple trips to the Planning Commission and sometimes on legal technicalities, getting it pushed off farther, and ended up with single family houses. So you can make a difference. Sometimes it feels like tilting against windmills, but if you get involved soon enough and learn how to do it, you can do it. So then I was appointed to, well, we had a big issue again in the neighborhood, spiked my interest again. There was an opening on the Planning Commission. I asked then Mayor Amix to be appointed. He did it. He held off until the issue I was all upset about was past the Planning Commission. So I started on January 2016 to fill an unexpired term. And I've just been appointed to my second term by Mayor Ananda this June. So I'll be on until 2023. And look forward to all the interesting things that are coming up. We're only limited, I think, by the ability of staff to get things to us. If the city would expand the planning staff fourfold, we'd be able to do a lot more. So.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next on the list is our second most recent chair, Commissioner Willie. Would you be willing to give a little intro to yourself?
Sure. Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. A PhD in geography, and within that, I'm kind of ecology and soil science where my focus is. I've kind of taken that in the practical direction, and I work in ecological farming and also advocacy for people moving towards ecological farming techniques. I'm a former business owner of a manufacturing business. So that gives me a different perspective on when we talk about industrial zoning and those issues. Built affordable housing with my husband for a short time in Baldwin City. So I got to see that through the planning process in Baldwin, which is a little different from ours. I've lived in a lot of places, so that gives me some good perspectives on land use and transportation, including I spent middle school in Germany, also like Commissioner Carter. And so understanding kind of their take on multimodal. I'm the only commissioner currently not living inside the city limits of Lawrence. So I live in the unincorporated area, and that brings a perspective that we otherwise don't have. But I also lived for 9 years in the city of Lawrence, and so I have experience with walking, biking for transportation in and around Lawrence. But I color that now with the idea of, can you still drive a fire truck through there, or pull a trailer full of metal? I mean, that I drive a lot of big equipment also, so that kind of gives me a different perspective on how we use our multimodal. Thank you.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Willie. Next up, Commissioner Ashworth.
Hello, my name is Sharon Ashworth, Planning Commissioner. I'm in my second year, I think, of my first term, most recent appointment. I've lived in Lawrence since '97 and really have been involved in a variety of issues in Lawrence. Lawrence is a great place, an easy place to get involved in city issues. So from PTA to transportation issues to planning issues just as an informed citizen and resident and advocate for various issues. My background is in ecology. I have a PhD from University of Kansas, and my expertise is in restoration, wetland restoration. I also dabble in prairies and native plants, and can sometimes use that on the Planning Commission, especially when we come up with some of those issues. But otherwise, in terms of transportation specifically, I come at that from a user of multi-modes of transportation. I'm a utilitarian biker, recreational biker. I bike to work, I bike to school, I bike to friends' houses, I bike all around the city. I don't take the bus, oddly enough, because it's not very convenient for me, but I have also traveled in Europe and just wondered at the amazing ability of some of those cities to get their public around on various forms of public transportation, which is sort of where I come to transportation planning issues with a great deal of interest and personal experience. So I'll just leave it at that so we can move on.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Ashworth. Commissioner Sands.
Hi, I'm Rob Sands. I'm a city appointee on my second year of my second term. I can't remember. I've got an MPA from the University of Kansas, and I really came into the interest in the Planning Commission through wanting, with outside of the election cycle, wanting to try to figure out how I could contribute just any energy I had into being a part of local government. I didn't realize I was so interested in local government until I got into the program at KU, the Masters of Public Administration, and I sort of learned what others have learned, in that you can realize the greatest impact for your energies politically by getting involved at the local level. It's where you live, it's where your neighbors live, and it's a real special thing. And I would say that I'm very thankful for not only the commissioners and who serve on boards, committees, advisory committees, and commissions, everyone who volunteers their time, but also city staff and really all the citizens who lend their expertise, take the time out of their evenings to me a lot on how any one issue impacts them. So I got into the Planning Commission about 5 years ago or so, after volunteering for a slew of boards and then finally contacting some city commissioners and saying, hey, I put my applications in for all these things, what can I do? And one city commissioner said, well, you do Planning Commission. So I've learned a ton in that time, and I'm happy for the boards to start interacting, because as was said at the onset, there is so much that goes into what a land use is. We have to constantly fight against ourselves to realize that some issues we can and should consider, and some issues we can't and shouldn't consider. And so it's good to get a greater depth and breadth of what the other committees are doing from their own words, that doesn't have to go through the filter of staff. Staff does a great job every day on behalf of us and on behalf of the rest of the citizens, but oftentimes you can't replicate what you learn by talking to an Aaron Payton or a Nick Kuzmiak about what's important to them as far as head issues, bike issues, etc. Thank you.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Sands. Commissioner Butler.
Hi, I'm Julia Butler. I have been on the Planning Commission for a while now. I can't remember when I started. I have been an attorney in town for about 17 years. I do primarily family law and criminal law. When I came here, I was just volunteering for a board. I didn't know what Planning Commission was. I didn't know what Planning Commission did. I was told it was one meeting once a month for a couple hours. And then I showed up and I was like, what the hell is going on here? And so I didn't know there were different types of soils. I had no idea what I had gotten myself into. Luckily, I've had some great people, Commissioner Willie, Commissioner Carpenter, everybody that's on the Planning Commission now, I've learned a ton from. It's still some days I question myself, but it's a great service to our community. And I think everyone on both boards does a lot to benefit people that they will never meet. And it just shows how much we care. So I've learned a lot, and I continue to learn new things every month. So just happy to be here and happy to get this work done.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Butler. And I think last, but certainly not least, our third most recent chair, right? Commissioner Struckoff?
I think so. I think the third last chair. My name is Eric Struckoff, Planning Commissioner. I moved to Lawrence in 1997 from Seattle, where I was in school at the University of Washington there. I was getting a degree in microbiology. I was a researcher in genetics. Moved to Seattle, to Lawrence in 1997 to take a job at KU, and I won't say retired because I'm only 54, but I left KU a little over a year ago after 22 years as a researcher there to join a new construction and development company. Construction is something I'd done on the side, custom carpentry for years and years, and I had a small company that I'd started about 6 years ago and rolled that into a new place here in town. So I went from science to development. In the meantime, I've been on the Planning Commission since 2013. I'm in the last year of the second and a half term. I fulfilled a half a term when I started, so it will be about 7 years, 7.5 years, I think, at the end of my term next summer. I got involved in the Planning Commission because as a cyclist and a walker, I was about 1.5 miles from KU, and for 22 years, I think I probably drove to work less than 10 times. Just wasn't necessary for me to do that. I was fortunate to live close, and I had pleasant streets to walk on most of the way. But I also rode my bike for recreation and for competition for many years. And that's what got me involved with the Bicycle Advisory Committee back in 1999, I think it was. And since then, I've been involved with that group, the Burroughs Creek Steering Committee, a couple of KDOT projects, the 5-county project, the 31st Street Extension project, steering committees like that, and most transportation related, because I wanted to see Lawrence develop as a big, grow up as a city in terms of transportation, develop ways that people can get around without burdening themselves and their communities with unnecessary driving, unnecessary car-related, car-centric things like that. And so I joined the Bicycle Advisory Committee, worked on these other projects, and then in 2009, I was asked to consider Planning Commission, but I was in limbo a little bit, possibly moving back to St. Louis, where I'm originally from, to help with my family's business there. But I did not do that and joined the Planning Commission a few years later, in 2013. And like Commissioner Carpenter alluded to, it's a way to change. It's a way to get involved and make your city and your community what you think it should be. It's a way to make decisions and to help those who also make decisions make theirs, to advise and decide. And that's a big responsibility. And it's one that I've never taken lightly, whether it's serving as a Bicycle Advisory Committee member or serving as chair of the Planning Commission. And so the amount of learning that has gone on in my time on this commission for me personally has just been amazing. The different perspectives, the amount of technical data, information, history, and procedural information that comes from our awesome staff every month. We obviously we couldn't do our job without that, and so these all these flow into you as a commissioner, and they flow back out in terms of in the form of policy and decisions and improving our community. And like I said, the good thing about being on the commission is often you're getting a chance to mold the community in your own vision in some small way. At least a tenth of the way. There's 10 of us here, and so we take advantage of all those viewpoints and come to a great community like we have now. I think when I look around at our community, our steady growth and our economic situation in relation to our peer communities, things like that. I think we do a pretty good job. When it comes to transportation in particular, that's a hard one. There's a lot of social and behavioral things that you have to overcome, and you can't just put a bike lane down or a bus stop in or put another bus on the street. There's a lot of behavioral changes that are required, and that is really, when it comes to transportation especially, that's really the hard part, is getting people to believe that they can, mainly getting to exist without their cars. And you have to find a way to make other modes, I call it more competitive. What it really means is more attractive. Hopefully we'll continue on down that path together as we proceed.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Thank you much, Commissioner Strokoff. And I do notice, I think we've had a new Transportation Commissioner join the call since we've been here. Tom Allen, is that right? We've kind of all introduced ourselves briefly, and I'd hate to leave you out as we launch into everything. So maybe you could just take a minute or two just to introduce yourself.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so my name is Tom Allen, and I teach at the University of Kansas, and I did have a small class tonight, so excuse my tardiness. And I have a background in architecture and urban design, and I lived in Lawrence originally. I moved here to work at an architecture firm, and I lived here from 2007 to 2012, and moved back here about a year ago, and I spent some time working as a civil servant on the East Coast. And when I moved back, I got really excited to see the positive momentum that Lawrence has had since I left in 2012. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to be a part of this group. So thank you so much.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Thank you much, Commissioner Allen. So at this point, I just want to turn it over to Nick Kuzmiak. This study session, I think, was really the brainchild of the Transportation Commission wanting to get together with us and talk about some of the things that they consider much, and if there's any sort of intersection with the work that the Planning Commission does. And so I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chair, so you can launch in. The only thing I would note is, we had talked about maybe trying to put an 8:30 end on the meeting, and we've gone through a lot of our time. We could maybe fudge with that a little bit, but I'd ask you just keep an eye on that. And the only reason we've put a time limit on it, not because this is not important, but because we could probably talk about it all night if we didn't. So I'll turn it over to you, and we'll be really interested to hear what you guys have to present.
All right. Well, thanks. Once again, Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC Chair. Want to give a quick shout out to staff, by the way, for making all this happen behind the scenes. This cannot have been easy to schedule. It's one thing for us chairs to kind of get together and, hash out a couple of ideas for an agenda, but to actually make it happen logistically is a whole nother story. So thank you, Mr. Cronin and Mr. Crick and everybody else, I guess, for getting this thing together. With that, I'm gonna, let's see, pull up some notes here. All right, so basically, I thought it would be instructive as an introduction to our first joint Planning Commission Multimodal Transportation Commission discussion to explore the links between land use and transportation. I think sometimes for those of us who maybe don't come from a planning or transportation background specifically, may not at first see the links between those two, especially because this is the first time that we've ever met. So there hasn't been a whole lot of opportunities to really make that explicit. So since my dad has been working on that intersection for most of his career, I figured I'd volunteer him and try to help bring us all up to speed on how the Planning and Transportation Commissions need to basically consider the effect that their decisions have beyond their exact jurisdiction. So therefore, this presentation is meant to be a pretty general overview, kind of a fundamentals. I believe it was originally presented to a graduate level class, so of planners. So I guess it's maybe more geared to you guys on the Planning Commission, but it's definitely for all of us. There are some examples of the relationship between land use and transportation from the DC and Baltimore region, but it's really more of a case study. So during the presentation, I would ask that you try to reflect on how these principles might relate to issues that have come before your purview on the commission that you're on, and how they might relate to Lawrence. I'm thinking we should probably hold questions and discussion until the end, so then we can kind of be working with the same set of material once we're all done, and then kind of really be able to jump into a conversation once we're all at the same level. So if that sounds reasonable, that's basically my brief introduction to my dad, Mr. Richard Kuzmiak. So he's on the line. And Dad, do you want to try to screen share, or do you want me to do it and advance slides as necessary? Are you still there? If so, you're on mute.
Yeah, that's always a problem. Hi.
It is.
I would like to screen share.
Yep. It's the green button at the bottom.
See it. We do a lot of this.
Let's see if that works.
Okay. You see a presentation sort of thing?
I do. It worked.
Okay. Well, let me introduce myself. Hi, everybody. As Nick says, my name is Rich Kuzmiak. I'm a transportation planner based in Silver Spring, Maryland. Supposedly semi-retired, but that ain't happening just yet. I hope all of you someday experience the singular joy of having one of your adult children actually call on you for your sort of advice and expertise. It's a proud moment, to be sure. So thanks, Nick, and I hope that I can throw a couple of bits of wisdom out there. As he said, I've been a transportation planner for over 40 years. I'm a civil engineer that got married with urban and public affairs, pretty quantitative background. And I've been working in the transportation field since like 1975, before some of you were born, of course. I spent a lot of the last 20 years really focused on the connection between transportation, land use, and travel behavior. As I get into all of the policy issues and trying to find the best way to plan communities, I've worked at from the federal level through regions, states, counties and local areas on a whole bunch of these issues related to air quality. I've developed methods for estimating walking and biking in relation to land use and facilities. It's a long, I think, relevant record. Trying not to spend too much time. So currently I'm working with the University. I'm an affiliate with University of Maryland's National Center for Smart Growth, and started this millennium working in the governor's office and the State Department of Transportation in Maryland on their sort of unique Smart Growth Act. So developed a lot of my sort of motivation in seeing how few tools and how limited the research were to support some of the radical stuff we were doing. It occurred to me during that time that silos were a really big issue. It wasn't so much that people weren't thinking towards smart growth, but departments, agencies just are not trained to collaborate like you guys are trying to do. And it struck me that silos were at the heart of this dysfunction. And if we could find better ways through our dialogue and the objectives we set and missions we set for our agencies, we could do a better job of solving these problems. And one of the paramount ones is this link between transportation and land use. So this is a presentation I developed almost a year ago for today for a graduate planning class in Maryland, where people were both on they're similar to yourselves in not they either had a planning background or they had a transportation background. I was just trying to help them marry the two. And so that's what this type of, that's this presentation is trying to do.
Sorry to interrupt real quick. Can you press F5? There, thanks.
Cool. To get the full screen? Yes, yep. Got it.
Now we're seeing
okay.
It, thanks.
So what's at issue? We know that the transportation system and land use patterns are highly intertwined and interdependent. They definitely affect each other, but how are they related? How well are they coordinated? And the spoiler alert is generally not real well. What happens when they're not coordinated? Well, you get inefficiency, you have limited options for travel, and you have a whole bunch of negative social, economic, and environmental impacts. Transportation, how transportation impacts land use. For forgive the bad metaphor, but it's the grease that allows the gears and the economy and the built environment to run. But transportation also stimulates and guides development by changing accessibility. Simple illustration of that. If you have a hypothetical city here whose transportation network gets you to the city's edge within 30 minutes, and then you go and you make an improvement, you expand a highway, widen it, all of a sudden that 30-minute window now expands outward. So all of that land in the shaded area all of a sudden is accessible and increases in value, and it becomes ripe for development because land value is higher. This is a major way in which the U.S. has grown over the last 50 years. How does land use impact transportation? Well, local jurisdictions typically create the land use plans, and they do it, I hope I'm not offending anybody here because it's not the intent. They do it with considerable autonomy and sovereignty. They develop the vision, specify the zoning, kind of the timing of when things are going to happen, phasing, that dictate the transportation needs, and then kind of look to others to then supply the needs. So go to either the state, county, or city DOT typically, and it ends up being a bottom-up process where the amount of funding available is typically what governs which of those projects get built. There's not a lot of collaboration, and more DOTs are now employing performance criteria to try to rate these projects based on a variety of criteria, so the most worthy rather than the most politically favored get built. We've gone through some key important growth stages in the US. Back in the days of horse and buggy, we had fairly small city circumference, generally defined by how far you could get by walking or carriage. Then came streetcars. We started pushing off into corridors, so we created these amoeba type areas with streetcar suburbs. And then mid to late 20th century, the auto came in, sort of changed things, highways, and the key shaping force was the auto. All of a sudden, we're pushing growth farther outward toward the fringes, but also filling in between the corridors. This is a quick set of slides that I think you'll find interesting, that when I was working in the Office of Smart Growth, we developed this to show how land had developed in the Washington-Baltimore region from World War II to present. And it just goes real quick. Here is, but it shows you the impact of how we've grown. So 1940, the red is the developed area, 1950, 1960, 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000. Unfortunately, I don't have more recent data, but I'm going to guess there's a lot more red than there is brown in that next vision. So what's happened is that as we've grown since 1950, all of our growth has gone from rural areas into metropolitan areas. So now 85% of all population in the US is in a metropolitan area at this point. However, that big blue wedge is all telling. That's where it's all gone. These are the suburbs of the central cities, which are more or less in that flat green line down there in the bottom. So we got about 71% of all metro population is now in suburban areas. It's a big deal. And what that has translated to from the big picture is looking from 1945, say, on to present, population in the US has increased by about 134%. The public road mileage has only gone up 25%, but that's kind of deceptive because it's largely paving of old roads or widening and improving them, plus a whole lot of freeway and interstate mileage that is high development patterns. In effect, as we become more and more auto-oriented, we've seen almost a 1,200% increase in vehicle miles of travel, which is huge when you see it as a proportion of population. And that's why we have congestion. We just can't keep up with it, and we don't have enough diversity in our modes or the layout of our places to begin to absorb that. So it's a very difficult problem to solve. Going back to how these areas evolved and looking at how different land use types create different transportation behaviors and needs and outcomes. If we start with the traditional downtown, we then go to the streetcar suburb, kind of a contemporary suburb, and then an urban fringe tract development that all of us know about. In the traditional downtown, we're looking at high densities, mix of uses, very good transit service and usage, very good walking, and scarce and pricey parking. Big deal. Okay? When we get to the streetcar suburbs, like we have around Washington, D.C., and maybe it's a little bit more like Lawrence, we have moderate densities, still decent, commercial activities along the arterial street, but it's walkable to the residential neighborhoods and not that far away, got good sidewalk coverage. Pretty good transit and managed parking. A lot of the parking is free, but you just can't park anywhere you wish like you can in the burbs. You have to sort of go to somebody's parking lot and, you know, there's going to be a limit on what you can do. So there's some break on that. When we get to the next setting, the contemporary suburb, this is Rockville Pike in Washington, but I'm sure you could, you know, a place that looks just like this. Low densities, long distance between any buildings, highly separated residential and commercial uses. Commercial activities typically are along arterials or in malls. It's a very auto-oriented design, lots of parking right in front of the buildings, kind of a discouragement for walking. Transit is fair to poor at best. Then we get to the great green spaces, the urban fringe, tract development, very low densities, complete separation of uses. If you want to get anything, loaf of bread, quart of milk, take your kids someplace, it's car trip. There's just no other way to do it. If you walk, it's totally recreational. Transit doesn't really exist here or make any sense here, totally car dependent. So we raise the question, what are the things that determine it and that connect, help us explain the relationship between land use and travel behavior? This is something I've been involved with as a researcher and planner for the last 20 years, pretty deeply for the national academies, federal transportation department, et cetera, and developed entirely new tools to begin to sort of predict these things. But we, you know, one of the primary surrogates for urban character is density. It's not sufficient to do everything you want to do in explaining, but it does a pretty nice initial job. If you take a place like Baltimore, which we're showing in this chart, where we took a handful of neighborhoods, 32 neighborhoods from throughout the metropolitan area. So we go from really downtown to really rural, and we look at the daily vehicle miles of travel that are per capita that are generated in those neighborhoods from travel surveys, and we plot them. With the density along the bottom scale and the BMT generation on the top, we get a very big difference between we see in our very urban inner city areas where a household is somewhere around, a person is generating maybe 15 vehicle miles a day, and follow the curve. By the time we start getting to these outer places, we're looking like 45 miles per day. And it's not just a linear change as you go out, it's basically logarithmic. Exponential is the opposite of that, of course. And you're seeing I can show you the same curve for just about any metropolitan area in the country. And I've developed quite a few of them. Very strong relationship with this pattern between density and vehicle dominance. Critics would say, well, yeah, but those people are probably also making higher incomes that aren't living in the city. And if you have more money, then you're going to travel more. Well, this chart basically pits the daily vehicle miles travel against the income of the household. As you can see, it's like a shotgun of dots. The relationship is just really poor. It's got an R squared of 0.281 for those of you who are statisticians and do curve fitting income. But and again, this is something we replicate everywhere. It's not the income that's driving it. There's something about the land use, the way things are shaped. So we acknowledge that land use is more than density. It also entails the proximity to the stuff that you need and opportunities. It entails abundance and variety of choices of places to go. It gives you a variety of transportation options, multimodal, and it incorporates human-focused design. Some of the folks that, one of the people that spoke went to UC Berkeley and may have known Robert Cervero, who together with Kara Kalkelman and Reed Ewing and some other academic luminaries created this framework called the 3Ds, which basically coined these characteristics as density, diversity, and design, where density, of course, is this concentration of people and activities. Diversity is the mix and balance of the uses that are there. And design is how is this thing been arranged so it is of human scale and orientation. In fact, is it walkable, basically, simply. So with density, how we typically measure it, it's either households or dwelling units, gross or net per acre for residential, or we might look at job density, or we might do an activity density with jobs plus population per acre. The effect on travel, well, activities are closer, trip lengths are shorter, Walking and biking are greatly enabled, and it supports quality transit. Diversity, mix and balance, how we measure it. Well, some simple ways are jobs, housing ratios. We also could look at retail and service establishment densities. There are indices that those academics that I mentioned earlier created called entropy and dissimilarity that use GIS, Geographic Information System data, to look at, to buffer origins or destinations for travel and see what the mix of uses is within a raster grid. And putting these in simple models is very revealing to show how important the degree of mix is and balance in affecting things like mode choice, VMT generation, auto ownership, and things like that. So effective travel of diversity. Households don't have to drive to reach activities. There's some more stuff that they can walk to nearby, shortens the distance, encourages walking and biking, reduces car ownership, and employees and visitors. This is important. If this is a destination, employees and visitors don't need a car to reach the site or travel on site. You can drive there. You don't have to worry about being abandoned in a car-only place. You can still do other stuff once you're there. So that means you can travel there by transit or some other mode and not feel like you've just made a lifetime decision about how you're going to get around. Finally, design. We're talking about pedestrian orientation, making the building setbacks minimum, bringing them to the face of the street. Having a comprehensive sidewalk and bikeway network in terms of coverage and connectivity. You want a street grid with small block sizes, with frequent and safe crossings, narrower streets, lower traffic speeds. Yeah, I can say just leave it at that. It'll come back to me what I wanted to say here, but say the effect on travel is it reduces pedestrian and bicycle level of stress. This is a term that's been coined over the last 5 years, and it's kind of like level of service, but it means is that there are things if you're walking and biking that are much more important to you than if you're driving. It matters if it's raining or if it's dark or if it's uphill. It's really important if you have to go and cross an arterial highway that's 6 to 8 lanes wide with fast moving traffic. We've been able to codify this stuff and actually create measures that allow us to nuance these links in this system to tell us how relevant that is to the person choosing to walk or bike. So it's really important to have a design element. Something that always surprises people when I bring it up is the importance of non-work travel. And just one. Darn it. Okay, I must have pulled one. So let me just say this. What we find out is that the great majority of travel has nothing to do with work. All of our transportation planning for eons has focused on trying to accommodate the commute trip. We build wider highways and faster highways and bigger highways, and we kind of plow over built areas so we can get people further distances to be able to commute efficiently. But it's kind of like we're chasing our tail. If you look over time, as we've grown out to the burbs, like I showed you in some of those early slides, what we've done is we've changed the mix of our travel needs, and it's gone much more into the non-work area where you're looking at the growth in shopping. Here's commuting in the bottom row, and you'll see it hasn't really changed a whole lot over time. But the big increase has been in shopping, family and personal business, social, recreational, and other stuff. It's a very different world than it used to be back in the 70s and earlier. Also of interest is that commuting isn't really even the major purpose of what's happening in the peak periods. And this, you can see this over time, National Transportation, National Household Survey. In the morning peak, commuting is only about 44% of the trips that are on the road. Look at the number that are family, personal, business. By the time you get to the evening peak, it actually becomes less than what's happening for family. So, the question we have to ask is, are we trying to solve the wrong problem? The takeaway is over 80% of our daily trips and over 70% of our miles from households are for non-work travel. Community design significantly impacts on non-work travel. If many more trips for non-work are made internally to the community, to the little hamlet that you're in areas where you have good mixed use, coordinated multimodal transportation systems using those Ds that I just described. And for transit to work, you can't just put a line out there. You got to have a compatible land use. The right formula is to try to create where you can higher density sort of mixed use nodes that are then very much more efficiently linked and served by transit. With transit, sort of a cardinal rule is you got to be able to walk at both ends of the trip. The model will show you from research that the time you spend outside a transit vehicle is worth 3 to 4 times the time you spend when you're actually on it, just because of uncertainty and physical effort and so forth. So if you can't wrap around the transit stops the right density of housing or the right density of destinations, such as employment or shopping, whatnot, people aren't going to use transit. So you just be wasting your money trying to prove that they can't. So maybe we've been trying to solve the wrong problem, and so I think we need to be doing what I've been preaching on this end, is that you focus on building the communities and the nodes. You will get a much more favorable, sustainable kind of result. Then for the longer trips, you basically connect those with transit now that you've got some sort of set of points that you can efficiently connect. So in conclusion, sorry to take so much of your time this evening, land use and transportation can't be planned independently. We need to know how they affect each other, and we really should try to, the committees, the coordination you guys are initiating tonight is really critical, very important. You should be applauded for doing this. You can't do these things independently. You can't do them in silos. Compact mixed-use transit and walk-friendly design equates with greater accessibility. You reach more opportunities at the same time, and equity, because we're finding a lot of places that have poor accessibility also are where people get shoved that don't have the money wherewithal to live in better places. And reduced auto dependence, which is pretty nice when you're thinking about things like congestion emissions and so forth. What's different in looking at a place like Lawrence, not to in any way diminish it, because I grew up in a small town myself, is that typically when I'm working on a project, there's lots of concern about, congestion and, widening highways and that sort of stuff, where you guys have a somewhat more manageable situation. But then on the other hand, if you're not driven by concerns about congestion and air pollution and so forth, you may not be as motivated to seek an unconventional set of solutions, right? So the more you know about how these factors interrelate, you get a better way to evaluate the plans that you're starting to discuss to see if you can do things that are much more, interconnected and supporting each other. And then finally, next to finally, non-work travel is very important, as I said. And if you want to do transit, you got to have the supportive land use to go with it. And I'm sure many of you know that, but there are a lot of people who surprisingly do not. I'll stop there because that's the end of my presentation, and I'll be more than happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kuzmiak. I think that was about the perfect amount of time. That was about a half hour. So that is a lot of information. Some of you probably now understand why I speak so fast. And I think what I would like to do is have Mr. Kuzmiak stand for any questions that the various commissioners may have about the presentation. Anything that they'd like clarification on, examples of, things that maybe challenge their perceptions, things they'd like to learn more about. And I think once we get our questions out of the way, then we'll kind of turn it inwards a little bit for a more inter-commission discussion. So if that sounds good to you, Commissioner Sinclair, I'm going to start with you guys. So do you want to let your people ask any questions that they might have?
Yeah, sure. Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. I would open the floor to anybody that would have a question. And I see right off the bat, Mr. Chair, David Carter, and then after him, Commissioner Sands, if you want to jump in.
Thanks, David Carter, Planning Chair. First of all, Mr. Kuzmiak, I just want to thank you for taking the time to join us and for your patience in waiting through our introductions to give your presentation. Yeah, you were right about Robert Cervero. I actually took a spatial modeling class from him, and one thing I have to say is these principles of density, diversity, and design are more qualitative than the very quantitative class that I took from him. And it's really, I really appreciate your encapsulating these principles in what may have seemed like a long presentation, but I think very, very rich and dense presentation of the principles. So my question is, if you would consent to sharing your presentation with us for later review, because I would really appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Rich Kuzmiak back. Thank you, David. I'd be more than happy to. And as I said to Nick in planning this, I have a number of kind of seminal documents, reports that I have put together that cap some innovative research projects that really take you deeper into this. And I'd be happy to give him the links to that. And I most certainly would be willing to share this presentation with you. Not a problem at all.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Sands, did you have a question you still wanted to ask?
So I want to thank you, Mr. Kuzmiak, for your presentation. It's one that I've been fortunate to hear similar themes from in the past. I know Strong Towns has a lot of stuff that involves transportation as a planning use, things like that. One of the things I wanted to ask is in your example, the streetcar neighborhoods of outside the DC area. Kansas City, Missouri has a number of streetcar neighborhoods. And back in the 20s and 30s, it developed when Kansas City, Missouri had a functioning streetcar system that was more than recreational use as it is now. One of the things I wanted to ask you is by way of making corrections to our current development pattern is, we want more mixed use, but mixed use, at least in our system as a zoning category. What are your thoughts on expanding uses, allowable by right uses for neighborhood commercial, for example? Thank you.
Rich Kuzmiak back. We've done some very interesting work here at trying to figure out what combination of uses makes for a good balanced community. And through a lot of pouring through data and trying some relationships, we've come up with some formulae that I can share with you about what is the right kind of, what are the right kind of things and in what quantity and in what mixture you want for a community for it to be able to stand on its own legs. And like top of the list would be a grocery store / healthy food, establishment. But counter to, sort of common wisdom, one of them is probably enough if you can walk to it. Right? But things like restaurants and that sort of thing, you kind of can't have enough of them. So there's this scale where, and again, I can share this with you, that it kind of gives you the ideal chemical formula for what you need to add or what you don't want to have too much of in a place. And we're beginning to work with that more and more. We've applied it in the state of Virginia in evaluating projects and prioritizing them for funding. And we wanted to give credit to land use across this very varied state where you have some big metro areas, but you got a lot of stuff that's small town and rural. How do you encourage those places to not just continue to expand highways, but to look inward and better develop the bones of their cities? And so, if you just go out there and try randomly, it's probably not going to happen. But we'd like to give people some guidance on what would be the right direction. And hence, if we see those things from the funding standpoint, we'd be more likely to prioritize them for funding. So I can share that logic with you if you like.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Commissioner Ashworth, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thank you for your presentation. This is Commissioner Ashworth. I'm curious in your combination looking at various boosting amenities and density and transit. One of the things that gets folded into a question when you're dealing with downtown areas is you put these amenities, you have walkable cities, you have transit, you also have gentrification. Is there anything in your experience, how have you dealt with that issue when you come up against increasing housing prices in areas that have achieved some sort of magic mix of those things?
This is Mr. Kuzmiak back. Yeah, great question. You've hit one of the key, you found one of the key skeletons in the closet in this work. In one of the National Academies projects I worked on the last couple of years, we were looking to try to get some handle on how these long-term demographic trends might affect transit in the future. And it was kind of motivated by this, all the chatter about millennials wanting to, move to cities and be very different from their parents, not own cars and all that sort of stuff. So we looked across the country, had a new sample where we looked at sort of the attitudes. I was gonna say this. There's no doubt that we found there's no doubt that people that are in the kind of millennial class up to 35, and particularly with some college education, have preferred to live in these places, not necessarily large cities, but in the Lawrences of the world, where you have a lot of stuff. And it's not because transit's there, but it's because transit helped make that area into a much more mixed use, walkable, amenity rich place. And what they really like is being able to have that stuff kind of within a moment's notice and with good choices across the board, and they're willing to pay for that. Now, here comes the gentrification question. The people that can afford to live in those places right now are folks that are making a nice income, and guess who gets displaced? In fact, you probably have examples there too. Here in Montgomery County, Marriott's national headquarters has for years been located in an auto accessible only business park with giant nameplate, gorgeous green glass buildings. And they realized they were missing the employment base who didn't want to go out to those places. So they picked up and moved to downtown Bethesda in order to retain and access more of these cultural, talented class, creative class employees. So there's a researcher called Richard Florida, who some of you may have read about, who has really been on kind of the fence about is this good news or bad news? And I still think it's good news. I'm currently working on a project as an affiliate of the University of Maryland Smart Growth Center, where we are in the process of planning out 21 station areas along the Purple Line, which is the nation's first circumferential light rail line that'll go from, however Washington, from Bethesda through Silver Spring all the way through University of Maryland's campus to New Carrollton. And it's going to connect up with the Metro rail system at 4 places. But many of the areas, unlike Bethesda and Silver Spring, are really challenged. And this is what, when I blanked out before when I was talking about design, a big issue is that many of our areas have grown through the 60s under the guidance and influence of a set of arterial highways. They were those streetcar corridors that got extended, but they didn't take transit with them. They have created the bones for these communities where you can't really walk any place because you have to go across a 6-lane arterial to do it. I mean, if just the idea of going across the street to a store is a big deal. So yeah, you're probably going to get in your car to do it because you don't want to risk your life crossing 6 lanes of traffic or wait that long for the inconvenience. So there's a big economic development element in this project where we're working with Eco Northwest on the economic development side, and we're using accessibility criteria that I've kind of championed and created models of to show the increased value of these places in relation to who gets attracted to these areas. And if you can do that, you got a leg up on who you can ask to invest in your area and what kind of incentives you might want to offer. But we're very conscious of the diversity and the equity issues because some of these places are really really challenged. And Montgomery County it's a very liberal county, has worked really hard to have affordable housing policies and engage in infill, but we know we need to cross a divide here and finding a way to locate those affordable housing opportunities such that everybody can take advantage of the richest in those developments. And so that's something we're going to be working on big time, but it's an issue.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Did any other planning commissioners have questions specifically for Rich? I see Commissioner Willie's hand up. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Hi, Karen Willie, Planning Commissioner. Mr. Kuzmiak, thank you for joining us. I have a question about one of your early slides kind of outlined the problem that we are currently facing. And that's, you talked about, auto-related travel as that infrastructure gets extended, then all of a sudden land becomes more valuable within that range. And there's the pressure for expanding your boundaries. So when the K10 bypass was completed and it's on the edge of our city, the city of Lawrence, all of the land that was along our arteries that lead into that became highly valuable for rural residential development, just the kind that you don't want to have to annex as a city going in that direction. And how do you push back against that kind of development with a kind of a larger view of what should go there in the long run if at some point it can no longer be ag land?
Great question. And it's kind of at the core of where my passion and focus has been. I've been working to create some modeling tools that seize on the concept of accessibility. Let me not take you too deep in this water, but you've heard that word a lot if you've been around transportation. We kind of just try to distinguish between mobility, which is a very car-focused sort of measure. How fast can you go once you're in your car? And that's what we really value, right? Where accessibility is more, how much stuff of what kind and what variety can I get to within a given time by how many modes? I mean, there's the wealth, if you can find that. So when we look at these areas that end up being ripe for development, this is the problem. Who's taken the lead on this? Has the transportation system and agencies created a policy that says, yeah, we really should just expand this? There's always the pressure to widen and expand highways, even knowing that it's going to be a self-defeating long-run prophecy, right? That's just going to grow back and you're going to get the wrong kind of development. We're trying to set up more of the kinds of conditions and performance criteria from, it's probably not the right agency, but the state typically handles the federal funding and puts the conditions on getting it out there, that we try to make sure that when we prioritize funding for a project, that it's going to serve more than a single purpose and it's not going to be detrimental to the future. So the coordination has to come with the individual jurisdictions, the regional planning organization, the MPO, and state, to try to make sure that when those areas are open, they don't just go crazy. I was on an expert land use panel for a long debated intercounty connector across roughly the same corridor where the purple line's going. And, they were going to build it, they weren't going to build it. They had the land acquired for 50 years. And then finally under different political regime in the governor's office, they managed to get it in. But it became very clear that once you built this, the heat map of accessibility and land value is going to change dramatically depending on where you put the interchanges and so forth and what your conditions were for developing those places. So it's really incumbent upon the people who are benefited by that new capacity to seriously think about how they want that place to develop. And unfortunately, in this country, when we leapfrog develop like we do, we don't do it in one comprehensive step. We take the easiest stuff to get first, which is residential. And then we got to pay for the services for that residential. We look for some kind of income generating, tax generating activity. And then we take whatever we get from that because we're competing with other jurisdictions. And before you know it, you've got sort of a mess that hasn't been planned. It's been sort of piecemeal and incremental. So the more that we can try to push for comprehensive, planning that involves looking at this whole piece and where you're going to go, I think still is going to come down to you're going to have to force people to do it. You can't tell local areas how to develop their plans or how to state their priorities, but the only thing you can do is sort of meter out the funding in a way that encourages the right stuff.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Commissioner Willie, did you have any follow-ups?
No, not for the moment, but I have a lot of curiosities for a later date.
Fair enough.
Very well. Planning Commissioners, anyone else have any questions? Mr. Chair.
Yeah, David Carter, Chair. mine is not so much a question, but a comment of appreciation. I think I've always been, for a long time, I've been familiar with the relationship between transportation planning and land use planning expressed almost solely in terms of density. That you've got to have the density of residents or commercial activity in order to make the transit worthwhile. What I don't recall ever hearing is this rule of having to be able to walk on both ends of the route. And I think from a design standpoint, this issue of walkability and its connection with transit is like a eureka moment for me. And I just want to express my appreciation for that, because I think this issue of walkability is so much more complex than just having access, by way of, sidewalks, for example. Walkability and the Multi-modal Transportation Commission, can express these principles much better than I, but I just think that this idea of nodes of transit having to be surrounded by walkable areas is something that will be on my mind. Certainly, for the coming months and years as we address these issues. So I just wanted to thank you for that insight.
Thank you back. I will tell you that I'm in the semi-retired mode, and the reason I am is that I still have so much work to do. And I'm driven like a lot of you people, that this isn't just a job for me. It's really been a life's passion. And I try to do strategically the right research, the right tool building, and the right connecting with decision makers to try to get better decisions made, knowing that politics is heavily going to rule. But the more that you can put numbers and facts in front of people, the more you can at least enliven the conversation and begin to see what the trade-offs are, and have groups like this collectively work towards better, more comprehensive and long-reaching solutions. We have this real problem in the US that, we're very short-term oriented. and it's real hard to get folks to give up, something today for something tomorrow. And when you're making these kinds of decisions, it's really critical to have a vision of where you're going to be in 10, 20 years with it. And that's just not how our funding operates. That's not how our institutions operate.
We appreciate those thoughts, Mr. Kuzmiak, and I do appreciate you coming and talking too. And in interest of time, unless anyone has any pressing comments or questions for Mr. Kuzmiak, I might see if Nick, if you would want to maybe move on to the next part, or what you were thinking on that front.
Yeah, Commissioner Kuzmiak, Chair, MMTC. So I have no illusions that we're going to get to items 2 and 3 on the agenda, and that's completely okay. I don't, however, think we're going to be able to finish by 8:30 if we're going to be able to allow MMTC members to also have questions. So I guess I'm trying to read the room here. Would we be okay in general to go until 9? Is that too late? I don't know. I think that would allow time for basically the Transportation Commission to also kind of wrap their head around this, while also hopefully allowing for sort of at least a little bit of internal discussion. But I would definitely encourage a hard cutoff at 9 at the latest, just because, yeah, it could get long-winded.
And so, Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair, you're thinking just limiting discussion to kind of the topic that is on the table now, maybe not getting to 2 and 3, but having a cutoff of 9.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be curious to know if any other commissioners have any serious problems with that. We wanted to stick to 2 hours, but if we can have a good discussion, it may be worthwhile. I see Commissioner Carpenter, your hand is up.
Jim Carpenter, Planning Commissioner. I just want to point out, I asked the question before we started whether this was a regular Planning Commission meeting or a mid-month meeting. Since we are in a regular Planning Commission meeting, welcome to our world. As has just been pointed out, to us recently. We've not been doing this correctly. So for us, our meetings go until they end unless we have a motion that passes by a majority vote to end the meeting. So we kind of have the time we need. But we have a suggestion for how long to try to take it. So I'd appreciate that.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Commissioner Carpenter, I appreciate that. And I think that maybe highlights a little bit of the not odd, but interesting structure we have in terms of having a sort of study session in the spirit of a mid-month meeting during one of our regular agenda meetings. But I think unless anyone has any strong objections, I think we just continue on and see at 9 o'clock how we're feeling and on this particular topic.
All right. Well, Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC Chair, seeing no obvious objections. Yeah, I think we can at least try to do justice to the introduction topic, which is appropriate because this is our introductory meeting. So with that, I will turn it over to MMTC. Are there any commissioners who like to get any clarifications, have any discussion points they'd like to bring up? Commissioner Bryan.
Thank you. Charlie Bryan, Multi-modal Transportation Commission. My question is, as we think about using policy to control the growth in a Midwestern town, how can transit be one of those limiting factors? Specifically, transit that relies on busing, not on rail or other less or more fixed routes. I'm just curious if there's policy options that should be considered or could be considered in a town that really has no constraints on its growth other than our public policies.
You may be muted, Deb. Mr. Kuzmiak, are you still on the line?
I'm very sorry. I didn't know that the question was for me.
No worries. Yeah, you're still.
I'm sorry.
Still at the center here.
Yeah,
it was. Be at it.
The question was for you. I was curious if there are ways that a Midwestern town, that doesn't have any real significant barriers to its growth other than our public will. How do we use transit and bus routes in particular to become a limiting factor in how growth is decided? Is that even possible to do something like that?
Well, I'll give you my 2 cents. It is much more likely that you can do a transformation of your land use with a fixed investment like rail, in that when you put that stake in the ground, you're basically making a statement that this land's going to be worth more. And thereby you can begin to encourage the kind of zoning that is appropriate around that station, right? But you can't afford, places like you are not going to go with rail transit, hopefully ever. But I don't think that you have to use transit to stake that claim so much as a policy that tries to build the nodes that have an attractive self-containment to their design. And I think you'll get people that will want to come and live in those places just for the amenity they provide. Geez, in the COVID world, where do we live and where do we work now, right? But then if you end up building enough of a mass in those nodes, then transit becomes a really smart option, right? But I don't know that you're going to guide that growth with sort of conventional bus service, even bus rapid transit. And I've seen a lot of the systems around the country. You don't get quite the land value buildup and the densification around those ports as you do with a rail system. So that's my experience. But I'd say go in on the community design channel, see if you can find a way to incentivize that kind of thinking, and I believe there's been enough of a sea change with what people are looking for as a place to live, that if they could live in a community that has those kinds of characteristics, that'd be much. I don't know if you've ever been to Portland, and for all of its ballyhoo, it's not 100% the nirvana that everybody says, but you can find a lot of little places that are pretty self-sustaining that aren't really near transit. But they exist because people really want to live in a place that's kind of a neighborhood, and they can get most of their basic things done there, and interact in the process. So my thought and my guidance would be to try to go that direction rather than trying to make it happen with transit.
Thank you.
Nick Kuzmiak, MTC Chair. Any other commissioners? Aaron, is that a hand I saw? Carol, that was a convincing hand. Commissioner Bowen.
Thank you for your presentation. On the one hand, I'm thinking, yes, 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 what he said. On the other hand, I'm thinking it's so abstract, I don't know how to wrap my head around it. But we do have a situation coming up. The City Commission recently came up with this idea to discuss about putting low-income housing in parking lots downtown. And having grown up in a city, I'm thinking, well, where are they going to shop? How are they going to get to work? And hopefully we don't expect them to work retail. They're never going to get anywhere that way. Where will all the basic stuff come from that Mr. Kuzmiak is talking about? Maybe this is something our two commissions should work on.
I wonder if it's more of a chicken and the egg thing. Do you first need the population to support the amenities and uses that make a place livable and interesting, or do you need the amenities first, or is there some kind of organic, incremental improvement on each of those fronts to eventually make it a place people would want to spend, their lives in? Mr. Kuzmiak, any thoughts?
Commissioner Bowen,
yep.
If they're low-income people, they're not going to have that many choices. They just need a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wish I had the magic bullet for you. The parking lot thing, at one level, sounds good because you'd be taking away parking, which is often a destructor of density and connected communities. But if there's nothing there to support those folks who've just landed the lucky prize of having a place to live in one of these centers, then what have you accomplished? It is a chicken and egg, no doubt about it. And that's why with the project that I'm talking about here in Montgomery County with Purple Line, we have a corridor coalition that's been formed for 5 years, knowing that this line is coming, and they've been really outspoken about not wanting to be left out of the room or off the table. So the planning tools that I've created work. I don't know how many of you. I know some people have a lot of geography in their background, but the advancements in GIS data and tools have really changed the planning landscape from even when the Ds were used. That we now can look at any place and see what's on the ground in terms of doctors' offices, optometrists, a pet store, whatever, and where people live, and within a census block, what the demographics are of those people. So we know where our needy population is. We know how they connect to the service. We know how the networks go on top of that to connect them via modes. So we can really quickly find out where the needful are on our platform. And that should help us prioritize where we would want to put these the affordable housing. We in fact did a study for the Washington Council of Governments where we used different accessibility measures to things like healthy foods, and in a push-pull fashion. Also, you don't want to be near like an incarceration center, or smoky bar, or an arena that gets thousands of people coming, as a good place to put affordable housing. So we were able to create these overlapping heat maps to identify like the best spots to concentrate, your efforts and incentives for locating the affordable housing. So we have those kinds of tools that we could use to figure out, more or less where's the best place to put this. But then, the comprehensive planning part is, then what are you going to do? What does your future look like? What's your vision for developing this area? Is that a good place ultimately to put these folks? It's ideal to put them in a place where they can benefit now and not have to wait for the future to eventually happen.
Sorry. Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC Chair. Thank you. Do we have any other comments from MMTC side before we, Commissioner Evans, I see your hand.
Yes, this is pretty much a comment. I think I'm in the same boat as Carol in terms of trying to get my arms around what this means for our community and how we interpolate these principles from Baltimore and Washington and other places into our relatively small community. But I know Jeff and Jessica are professorial, and I'd kind of like to ask them to comment. Jessica, are you still with us? Yeah. And Jeff too. When you see a presentation like this, what are your major takeaways in terms of, oh, gee, that's a great idea and we should be doing that, or that doesn't apply to us because of the size of our community and where we are and the modes that we have? You guys want to take a shot at that for us?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Be happy to
go, and Jessica can definitely chime in after me on that one. My takeaway from a presentation like that is I don't think a lot of the items that were mentioned are, required to be of large cities. I think you can bring them to any community, and it's just good planning practice. And I think we have a lot of that foundation work in Plan 2040. We have a lot of it in Transportation 2040. It's a lot of it's just kind of getting those principles, those guidances, those kind of big overarching goals in place. And now it's the work of the two bodies to put that into practice, bring it to code and bring it into the everyday planning realm. And that's the part, as a comprehensive planner by trade, that's the part that takes the longest and can sometimes seem the most grueling, I guess is a good way of putting it, that it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a long time to filter down into codes. But, a lot of the items that were shared were items that I think you would say could work in a town of 5,000, 50,000, 500,000. It's really just good everyday planning practice that you could incorporate by code into any communities. And Jessica, anything from the transportation side that I've not touched on?
And I think Jeff's right. And I think I heard one of the planning commissioners say, we begin this year-long process, multi-year process to do some of this work. And I think Jeff's right. That's exactly what that looks like, is implementing our long-range plan. In doing that, the the Metropolitan Planning Organization is exploring some scoping process next year to explore some options we believe could be short-term action steps to begin some of that work, to look at national best practices regarding some of these possible outcomes related to access management planning, amending major thoroughfares map and street classifications or design standards, establishment of transportation corridor overlays that are currently placeholders in the development code, exploring and identifying land use or land development code revisions to improve walkability and bikeability. We likewise are working with Lawrence Transit to work on, they're getting ready to do an entire route restructuring. And what does that look like in terms of how people access transit service and walkability, rolling out bus stop amenities when we talk about comfort and accessibility. That's part of walkability. And so I think that is ongoing work in our community, and it's just a matter of identifying what of these other strategies we want to continue to work to evolve to implement our plan's visions.
This is Commissioner Evans. Thank you. That's very helpful, and I look forward to that. Appreciate it.
Commissioner Kuzmiak here, MMTC. Steve, you beat me to it. I was certainly curious what the staff also thought about it. So glad somebody asked. All right, we have 20 minutes open now at this point. I don't see any other urgent hands. So at this point, I guess I'm not entirely sure how we're going to kick this thing off, but I think at this point, at least for me, the gears are kind of turning a little bit as to now knowing what we know, that the decisions that we make as transportation commissioners have an effect on how land could be used, because it could, increase or decrease its value. And what you all do on the Planning Commission also has an impact on how transportation is viable, really. I mean, it's based on the density and diversity, and I already forget the other D, that's sad. Whatever the third D was. If those aren't taken into account, then really only one mode is going to be viable for those that can afford it, the single family, or the single occupancy vehicle. So I'm wondering, in lieu of having every decision go past both MMTC and Planning Commission, which would be wildly inefficient, is there a way that we can, moving forward, stay in closer communication in terms of having a meeting similar to this, maybe once every 6 months or a year, as your schedule permits, to allow us to kind of see what the other side is? The reason I ask that is, I think in lieu of actually having decisions go through both commissions, what we could at least try to do is say, how does this affect the built environment? If we're going to have East 19th Street be, I don't know, anywhere from 22 feet curb to curb to 31 feet to, what was the biggest one? 45 feet? It was massive. The way that we choose to redesign a street does have an impact on what the built environment's going to be like. If you want a quaint little neighborhood where kids can play right near the street, a 45-foot wide street is probably not going to help you get there. So, I mean, what we do does have land use implications. So, I mean, Planning Commission's plate is full enough as it is, for sure, to add yet another layer of thought onto it. But I'd be curious to hear from, somebody on the Planning Commission who might have thoughts of how to add this layer of, complexity, basically.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. Does anybody on the Planning Commission have a comment they'd like to make in response? Mr. Chair, go for it.
Thanks, David Carter, Planning Chair. I can't say, Mr. MMTC Chair Kuzmiak, that I have an idea, but I can't say, I mean, I think ironically the missing D was design, and it was the element that I think we wanted to be able to talk about if we had more time. This idea of the synthesis of your work and ours, I think, does overlap there in design, and in I think a clearer awareness on our part, on the Planning Commission's part, of what are the design elements, and this goes beyond street level design. I'm talking about corridor design, for example. And that was something that, time permitting, I was really interested in diving into, because I think this idea of the web, the network of different transportation modes and how they connect not only space within each network, but between networks. What are those nodes is exceedingly important. And I think that's why also your dad's observations were especially interesting to me. This idea of walkability, the principle of walkability at transit nodes. So I would extend that, beyond walkability, but also to bikeability and any other mode that you're interested in. So I think, I don't know what the next step is, except I say, just speaking personally, this issue of connectivity between modes is especially interesting to me. And Mr. Kuzmiak, I see that you've begun screen sharing. I think I'll turn it over back to Nick and see if he'd like to call on you.
Okay, Commissioner Kuzmiak, MMTC Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Carter. All right, Dad, so are you showing something in service of Commissioner Carter's particular point on how we can kind of always think of connectivity? Or did you accidentally share your screen? You're muted if
that's the problem. I couldn't get back to the unmute. So it kind of conjured up a visual that I thought might be helpful, whether you go this far or not. But just to show you what's possible and what people are doing in where we live, and we're doing this study of the purple line and looking at walkability and so forth. What the county did is they took their GIS network and they coded in all of the sidewalks and bike trails and so forth to find out what the points of stress were, and hence where they wanted to make improvements and sort of focus and prioritize computing. So again, just to throw something by you to show what other people are doing, it is possible to go in and put these maps together like this and indicate where your gaps are in your system. Now, we also have tools then that will route paths of travel by any mode over these networks and pick the path of least resistance or shortest travel time, right? What they're showing here is that red is unacceptable because even if there's a sidewalk that the traffic is too fast and it's too close and there's no buffer, and other places where it's dark blue, it's like, oh yeah, a kid could walk down the street by himself and nobody would worry about it. And in between is the yellow, which is kind of sketchy, but maybe people will do it. Now, if we are trying to, and with this purple line work, as we look at one of our station areas, we'll stare at this map and we'll begin to see what areas are poorly connected right now. But we can go that extra step to actually use the model to create the shortest path over these links, and particularly going across crossings. If you look at these crossings, get pretty complicated. So, you want to go from one of these corners to another. Which direction do you go? And you got to cross two links, and then you got to worry about what's the level of traffic, how fast it's going, and so forth. All that figures in. If what we can do with this is hone in on where the gaps are and where the best bang per buck would be at making improvements, so as to bring more walking from that neighborhood to a place, for example. Now, again, this may be way down the road for you, but I'm just trying to show you the kinds of tools that we're now able to work with to really picture what's out there beyond just what we think it is. We can begin to grade this stuff and quantify it to where we can say this has an impact on your travel time and you're not likely to go there. So you have to find some other place that's much longer, and therefore you're probably not going to walk there. I don't know if this is helpful at all. I just wanted to
Yeah, so I'd like to jump in here real quick, Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC Chair, and give Jessica a chance to comment on this, because I believe MPO is behind a lot of the bike maps and pedestrian maps that we have, right? I admittedly am not as familiar with their GIS resources as I really should be, but from what I know, we do have pretty comprehensive mapping. I don't know if we necessarily have it as a rating of comfort, but this is how we determine what projects show up on the bike ped CIP, right?
Jessica Mortinger, Transportation Planning Manager, Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Organization. I realized I forgot that introduction the last time for those of you who may not know who I am or what I do. But yes, it's very fascinating that Mr. Kuzmiak decided to present something to talk about shortest path analysis. It's one of the tools we're working on building in a model right now that will be brought to a future multimodal transportation commission as we look at sidewalk improvement prioritization. However, our pedestrian plan also does have some level of comfort analysis already that we have previously done, and we've used that based on our best data capacity. So it's possible we need to come back and present some of that work to you, and or continue to evolve the tools that we have related to prioritizing sidewalk improvement and or non-motorized prioritization as we evolve our GIS capabilities.
Mr. Chair, if I may, Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services, for the Planning Commission's benefit on this one.
We were planning on bringing the MPO and some of their projects to you at a mid-month meeting this year that we have not been able to get quite scheduled yet. But just so you're aware, there is a really great amount of work that the MPO is putting out there that we use as part of our everyday planning analysis for the reports that the Planning Commission sees and all of the analysis we do for our long-range efforts. So we do dovetail those quite together. And I'd also be remiss to mention that part of Plan 2040 is, of course, Transportation 2040. The multimodal, or excuse me, the Metropolitan Transportation Plan is incorporated by reference as your transportation element in your comprehensive plan. So we try to bring those together as seamlessly as we can as part of our planning analysis.
Thank you, Jeff. David Carter, Chair. I guess since you addressed, I think you addressed, I'm not sure if you addressed me or Nick, so, but yeah, that's an important observation. Thank you so much.
Luke Sinclair, Vice Chair. The Planning Commission. I see Commissioner Ashworth's hand up. Go ahead, Commissioner Ashworth.
Commissioner Ashworth, just harking back to something that Nick Kuzmiak had said previously, one of the things that I find very helpful, what planning staff does is whenever we're going through any of our documents that are come up before the commission, is there's always a reference to Plan 2040. How does this fit in or does not fit in with what we're seeking to do as a community in Plan 2040? So I don't know if the Multimodal Transportation Commission, when you have those things come up, how it maps with particular items in the Transportation 2040. You brought up 19th Street, which is an excellent example of the incredible land use potential changes, not only from the widening of that street, but the connection it made to O'Connell Road, which is a huge land use and transportation issue. And just from a citizen's point of view, that spoke to me as terms of not following what I thought Plan 2040 had laid out. So while that's not something that's coming before the Planning Commission or came before the Planning Commission, just having those touch points all the time from staff, I find very, very helpful.
Hey, Kuzmiak, MMTC Chair. Commissioner Ashworth, I think that's a good idea, and I realize I'm not entirely sure if we have Transportation 2040 tie-ins on each of our agenda items. If we do, I apologize for missing those, but I think since a lot of the goals are shared between T and P 2040s, I don't know, I guess this is kind of me asking for staff something beyond what they even are already doing, but I mean, if we were to add how it ties into both Plan 2040 and Transportation 2040 on both of our agenda items where it's relevant, could that basically take the place of having to do a much deeper dive into, what would the other commission think? Because I think a lot of the time we'd probably find out that they're similar enough that it almost seems like they're repeating each other, which is a good thing. They're supposed to inform each other. But I think at this point, we mostly see how it ties into our strategic plan initiatives, which is important. But I think, I don't know, at this point, at least I'm a lot more familiar with those because there's not quite as many goals in the strategic plan, but T2040 is much more dense of a document. So I do wonder if it would be helpful in say there's a planning commission item that says, hey, we're going to add ADUs on RS5 lots, right? In that case, it'd be really nice to see not just what Plan 2040 has to say about that, which it says that exactly, but it would also be nice to see in T2040 that having denser development can lead to more sustainable land use as well as decreased transportation costs. So that'd be kind of an easy plug to say, what would transportation think about this? Commissioner Willie?
Planning and Development Services, if I may, Mr. Chair, that is an active item
for the Planning Commission. I would advise the commissioners to keep that in mind as proceeding on that item.
Apologies. Commissioner Willie?
Mr. Chair Kuzmiak, you had asked how the two groups here could collaborate and where the needs were, and that's been part of our discussion. From my point of view, we have a couple of sector plans, area plans that are in much need of being updated with some serious updating. And I think that's really where we would need not only the input from the multimodal transportation, but also the kind of tools we've been talking about that Mr. Kuzmiak the Elder and our MPO are being able to roll out for us, because that's where we put forth the kind of vision that we then apply in our day-to-day item by item work. So that's really where I would see the biggest need that we would have from you is in that kind of visionary work. And also, we're not quite sure when that's going to come on our schedule, but.
Commissioner Kuzmiak, Chair MMTC, I like that idea. I think that's a good starting point that is far out enough in the future that there is a potential for. So I would probably leave that to, I guess, staff to decide when to bring that to us as well, but we can at least try to keep an open line of communication between the two chairs of the two commissions if that's possible. Let's see.
Sinclair. Oh, sorry, Nick. I was just going to say, planning vice chair. I didn't know if Jeff would be able to just briefly speak to the status of the sector plans, just so everyone knows like when we can be expecting those things to be moving in front of us.
Certainly. Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services. Planning Commission probably remembers about this time last year, we were gearing up for an annual work plan discussion at your orientation. Part of what we normally would do before Plan 2040 really started going through all of its updating processes was every year we'd bring you a work plan for the planning department to go through. These are the items that are on this year's list. Do we need to adjust and go through those? And we also take that to the city commission and the county commission, since that workload is a joint body for our department. We would expect that work plan to be coming back to you very soon to begin for the 2021 cycle of that. The sector plans were identified, I would safely say probably throughout Plan 2040's revision process and also through your deliberation that you had as being something that needed work going forward. There's been a lot of implementation steps that came out of Plan 2040 that we're still working our way towards. Actually, quite a few of them that are currently on the way there. They had not risen too high on that work plan list as yet, but I think during the course of 2020 and what we're seeing in a lot of our applications, I think they're probably going to see them come up a little bit more in 2021. But we would expect that to come before the Planning Commission, probably November, December would be the hope, to then be on its way to the City and County Commission in January, hopefully February, all withstanding the calendars holding together as best as they can.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Vice Chair. Thanks, Jeff. Nick, you were about to say something. I cut you off. Sorry about that.
No, I was actually basically going to turn it back to you, so good call. Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC Chair. So in terms of trying to piggyback off Commissioner Willie's suggestion that we try to collaborate on those plans, Jeff, do you think that's too soon of a horizon to even really think about that? Is there a timeline that we need to be cognizant of to push these things through? Or is there an opportunity to do something either similar to how we approach the parking standards updates, or even something a little more unusual, something kind of like a joint subcommittee where maybe two members of each commission were on it as kind of a dig deeper group, you know? I don't know if there's a precedent for that, but it might be an easy way to not have to involve all 19 of us at the same time.
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. I think that's a great idea. I think, there's a lot of different avenues to get going on that one. The parking amendment, I think got started sometime in 2011, 2012, somewhere in there, and has been going on for a number of years. But I think right now we're really at the ground floor for working through a lot of those specific land use plans, the sector plans, and those items and getting them up there. So I think this is kind of hit at the most opportune moment to be having this discussion, because I think as a lot of those plans are going to be going forward, I think truthfully it's going to have to be the vision that we see both from Multimodal Transportation Commission, Planning Commission, the MPO Policy Board, and some of those other organizations and other committees to weigh in on those, because I think as we saw tonight, and I can tell you our staff was very aware of, is that a decision on one does not occur in a vacuum. It happens and has an effect on everybody in that. So I think that's probably, we're hitting at the right moment with that discussion. As far as the details, I think there's a couple different avenues that we could kind of pursue and investigate going forward, but certainly the chair's mention of a subcommittee is a possibility we could take a look at.
Okay. Nick Kuzmiak, MMTC Chair. Thank you for the input. I'm glad to hear that there is definitely some flexibility in that. So it's encouraging. So we are at 9 o'clock. So Commissioner Sinclair, I'm going to turn it back to you to leave it up to your judgment whether to postpone our other two topics for another time, which I would personally suggest, just to give us kind of more of a fresh start later on, and to also be a good impetus for us to plan a future meeting. But I will leave it to your judgment to consider the progress of this meeting here.
Sure. Luke Sinclair, Planning Vice Chair. Thank you, Mr. Chair Kuzmiak. But I would agree with you. I mean, my preference would be just to be able to tackle the next couple in a separate meeting, and just so we could be fresh on it. I don't want to cut anybody's comments off. If anyone has any other comments or questions about this particular topic, I think if we could, maybe we're at 9 o'clock, but to the extent anyone has anything to add to this, I'd like to make that an opportunity at this point before we kind of wrap things up. Does anybody on the Planning Commission have anything they want to share, comment on, or ask a question of? Nothing, Commissioner Butler?
Not at all.
Okay. And Mr. Chair Kuzmiak, do you think there's anything that anybody on the MMTC would want to be adding?
Let's ask them. Anybody? Final thoughts? Carol?
Just a statement of food for thought. Transportation is a major land use.
Thank you, Commissioner Bowen. I agree, especially for the storage of vehicles. This is Commissioner Kuzmiak, MMTC Chair. I would say in that case, we're good on our side.
Luke Sinclair, Planning Vice Chair. Thank you, sir. One thing I do want to bring attention to, and maybe even ask a question about before the night is out, is that we had one written communication I noticed in the packet from Jenin Amin or Amin about, and it actually, I think, applied a little bit to this. It had to do with providing bike and pedestrian access from the multifamily housing along Bob Billings between Castle and Iowa to shopping and groceries on South Iowa. And I guess one question, and maybe this is for staff, those sorts of inquiries, is that something that staff can respond to that individual about, or is that something that's more suited to a discussion here for today's purposes?
Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director. That would be one that staff would be happy to take care of and get that taken care of. I think it's a little probably best for staff to address. It may not be for the broad bodies good at that aspect, but we'll be happy to take care of that.
Okay. Thank you, Luke Sinclair, Planning Vice Chair. Well, I do appreciate everyone joining tonight. I appreciate the Multimodal Transportation Commission joining tonight. I think very interesting discussion, and I do hope that it's the beginning and that we can have another time in the not so distant future to discuss some of these other topics. And I would ask, maybe it would be appropriate to ask Jeff to maintain that contact with Multimodal in terms of maybe scheduling another session of this nature. But thank you to you all. Thanks to those of you who helped provide input on the agenda itself. And thanks to planning staff for arranging this too. I would, I guess at this point, unless anyone has anything to add, and you're welcome to, I'd entertain a motion to recess from a planning commissioner until Wednesday's meeting at 6:30. Commissioner Sands? Commissioner Sands, can I count your, well, I hear a motion from Commissioner Willie. Commissioner Sands, is your hand motion a second? A thumbs up affirms it, I guess. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Do we need to take a roll on that, Jeff?
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services Director. We do. I'll go ahead and run the roll for you on that vote. Commissioner Ashworth?
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter,
Yes.
Commissioner Carter,
Yes.
Commissioner Payton,
Yes.
Commissioner Sands,
Yes.
Commissioner Sinclair.
Yes, and I'd be remiss not to thank Mr. Rich Kuzmiak for joining too. Thank you also.
Commissioner Struckoff,
Yes.
Commissioner Willie.
Yes.
Motion passes 9-0.
All right. Guess we're adjourned until Wednesday.
See you then.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Yes.